I still remember the first time Chika went viral. It wasn't planned. It wasn't polished. It was just her, standing in front of a small roadside suya stall, laughing too hard at a joke the vendor made. Someone in the crowd recorded it, uploaded it, and by the next morning, her laugh had traveled farther than anything either of us had ever done. We were both fresh graduates, restless in Lagos, waiting for jobs that kept delaying us. Chika had always been the quiet one, the type who preferred to listen instead of talk. In school, she never raised her hand in class unless she was certain of the answer. But that laugh, the one that spread across WhatsApp groups, then Instagram, then TikTok, it revealed a side of her no one had noticed. I watched as her phone began to buzz non-stop. Notifications came in like rain hitting a tin roof, loud and endless. People were tagging her, calling her the girl with the golden laugh. Even neighbors who never cared for us before started knocking at the door, pretending to check in, but really just wanting to see her. At first, Chika treated it like a joke. She rolled her eyes and said it didn't mean anything. But I saw her smile linger longer in the mirror. I noticed the way she replayed the video again and again, as if trying to understand what the world had suddenly discovered in her. That week, she started dressing differently, nothing dramatic, just small changes. A brighter lipstick. A tighter blouse. Shoes that made her walk with more sound. She began taking pictures of herself in places we normally walked past without noticing, the graffiti walls, the open markets, even the traffic jams. I, on the other hand, remained in the background. I was always the one holding the phone, framing the shots, suggesting captions. She called me her manager in a playful way, but I knew what it really meant. I was both the audience and the worker behind her growing stage. Then, one night, she posted a simple selfie with the caption, "Sometimes your laugh is your passport." By morning, she had 10,000 followers. By evening, a brand selling wigs had sent her a message asking if she wanted to collaborate. That was the night everything shifted. I could sense it even in the way she moved around our small apartment. She no longer floated through life like a girl waiting for her turn. She walked like someone who had been chosen. And as I lay on my bed that night, listening to her type furiously on her phone, I realized I had just witnessed the beginning of a story that would test everything I thought I knew about friendship. When the wig brand sent their first message, it felt like a prank. We laughed at the thought of strangers giving Chika free hair just for posting a picture. But the package arrived within days, neatly wrapped, smelling faintly of chemical sweetness and newness. It was the first parcel ever addressed to her. Not to our apartment. Not to a resident. To her name. I watched her open it with trembling hands. Inside was a silky brown wig, glossy and artificial, with a handwritten note that read, "Welcome to the family." The first photo she posted wearing it brought in more likes than the viral laugh. Her followers doubled. Then doubled again. And soon, strangers were writing under her posts like they knew her personally, "Sis, you are glowing. We love your energy. Teach us how to laugh like you." At first, it was intoxicating. Our evenings transformed. Instead of watching TV or complaining about job rejections, we staged impromptu photo shoots in the apartment. She learned how to tilt her chin just right, how to arch her back, how to look at the phone camera with both confidence and innocence. I learned how to frame pictures against cracked walls, dim bulbs, and Lagos traffic, turning ordinary chaos into curated aesthetics. The neighbors who used to ignore us now greeted Chika with wide smiles. They asked about her hair, her lipstick, her secret. Some began addressing her with a new nickname, Influencer. She laughed it off, but I saw how her walk grew taller, her steps heavier, as if she carried the weight of new eyes watching her every move. But popularity has its price. It started with time. Every free moment became content. Eating wasn't just eating anymore, it was a meal shot with the right angle. Walking to the market became a fashion runway. Even our quiet nights before bed turned into her scrolling endlessly, studying other influencers, copying hashtags, measuring engagement. Then came the first wave of envy. Old friends from university, people who once overlooked her, suddenly resurfaced in her comments and DMs. Some were supportive. Others accused her of changing too fast. I saw her shoulders tense when she read them, but she never stopped posting. And then there was me. I became her shadow. The one holding the phone in crowded markets while she posed. The one finding the best light in our cramped room. The one carrying her bag when both her hands needed to be free for selfies. She called me her manager, and sometimes she meant it as a joke. But the longer I stood behind the camera, the more invisible I felt. One night, as she posed on the balcony with the city lights glowing faintly behind her, I caught a glimpse of her through the lens. She wasn't my best friend anymore. She was someone else, someone rehearsed, polished, and distant. Her eyes sparkled for the phone, not for me. I lowered the camera, suddenly heavy in my hands. That was the first time I realized this story wasn't just about her rise. It was about my slow erasure. And as I lay awake later that night, listening to her phone buzz endlessly with notifications, I wondered, when the whole world wants a piece of you, how much is left for the people who knew you before? The first brand deal was just the beginning. Soon, the apartment became a revolving door of deliveries. At first, it was wigs, then makeup palettes with glittering packaging, then clothes folded neatly with tags that whispered prices neither of us could afford. Parcels stacked against the wall until there was barely space to walk. Our once quiet, modest room turned into a showroom, a cluttered space where cardboard and bubble wrap ruled more than we did. I used to recognize every corner of that room. Now it was unrecognizable, buried under the weight of things that weren't ours, things meant only to be displayed, worn once, and then forgotten. And I was buried with it. My days no longer belonged to me. They belonged to Chica's growing audience. Each morning began with her asking, "What should I post today?" as if my mind were nothing more than a content machine. I carried tripods on my back like a second spine, scouted walls that made better backdrops than they did homes, and adjusted the angle of the sun on her skin as though I had the power to command light. When we walked through the streets of Lagos, people noticed her now. Sometimes they whispered, sometimes they pointed. "That's the girl from Instagram." Some asked for selfies. Others smirked and muttered words sharp enough to cut, "influencer wannabe." Through it all, she smiled, perfected her wave, straightened her wig. And I carried her bag, her props, her world. Neighbors joined in the transformation. Women who once complained about her noisy laughter now asked what lipstick shade she was wearing. Children who ignored her before now chanted "influencer" when she passed, their voices carrying through the courtyard like a new anthem. I walked beside her, invisible, my presence reduced to a shadow. It wasn't only the outside world. Inside, the imbalance grew sharper. While her phone buzzed endlessly with likes, comments, and brand emails, mine remained silent. Bills piled up in my inbox unanswered. Job rejections slipped into my messages like cruel reminders that while she was rising, I was still sinking. And yet, I couldn't pull away. I told myself I was her friend, her anchor, the one who kept her grounded. But the truth was uglier. I was afraid of being left behind entirely. I clung to her success because it was the only light near me, even as it burned my skin. The humiliations came quietly, in moments small but sharp. At a fashion pop-up in Surrelia, when someone asked if I was her assistant, Chica laughed and said, "She's just helping out." No correction, no acknowledgement that I was her best friend. I smiled weakly, swallowing the shame like bitter medicine. Later that night, when she danced in the glow of her phone screen, replaying videos of herself, I cried silently in the bathroom, muffling my sobs under the sound of running water. Even my body began to betray me. Sleepless nights editing photos on a cheap, glitching phone strained my eyes until they burned red. My back ached from carrying her equipment. Food became an afterthought. Some days I skipped meals entirely, convincing myself I wasn't hungry. My reflection in the mirror grew duller, my cheeks hollow, my shoulders hunched, the physical proof of a life lived in someone else's shadow. And still, she didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but chose not to. Her laugh, the one that made her famous, no longer came freely. It was practiced now, perfected for the camera, played on cue when recording. I missed the real one, the clumsy, unpolished laugh that used to erupt when we gossiped about neighbors or complained about Lagos traffic. I missed my friend. But she was no longer mine to miss. She belonged to the world now, to an audience that demanded pieces of her day after day. And me? I belonged nowhere. Not to her, not to myself. By the time the third parcel of the week arrived, I no longer rushed to help her open it. Instead, I sat on the bed, staring at the unopened box as she squealed in delight, her fingers trembling over the wrapping. She didn't notice I wasn't beside her, didn't notice my silence, didn't notice the way my eyes begged for her to turn and see me. In that moment, I realized something cruel. I had become background noise in her story, the faint hum behind the melody of her life. And nothing I did, no amount of loyalty, sacrifice, or suffering, could make me more than that. But even shadows have their limits. And mine was nearing its breaking point. The nights grew longer, though the clocks told me nothing had changed. The glow of Chica's phone was no longer just light, it was a wall. A wall between us. Every laugh she practiced, every smile she perfected, bounced back at her through the screen, leaving me invisible in the corner of the same room. I was there, but not really. My body sat, my hands folded, my breath steady, but my spirit hovered above, watching a scene I no longer belonged to. Chica had stopped asking if I was okay. She no longer noticed the unopened parcels, the skipped meals, the trembling in my hands when I held the camera. The attention from strangers filled her ears so fully that my silence no longer sounded like absence, it sounded like nothing at all. At the pop-up in Surolia, it happened again. The crowd swarmed her as if she were oxygen and they had been holding their breath. They clapped, they called her name, they took pictures. And me? I stood with a tripod in my hand like a gatekeeper to a kingdom I had no passport for. Someone pushed past me, laughing.
Please, move, you are blocking the shot.
I smiled politely, but my chest cracked quietly inside. My best friend stood on the pedestal of admiration, and I was nothing but furniture, something to be shifted out of the way. At home, her parcels piled higher. Brightly colored wigs, shoes that sparkled like disco balls, perfumes that clung to the air long after she had walked out of the room. The scents filled the silence like reminders. She was moving forward, and I was stuck. I stopped checking my reflection. Mirrors no longer showed me a face I recognized, only a tired stranger with hollow cheeks and eyes too heavy to hold. One evening, she tossed me her phone without looking up.
Just record this quick clip for me.
I obeyed. I always did. I framed the shot, held the phone steady, pressed record. She danced, laughed, twirled, and the camera adored her. When the video ended, I stopped recording and stared at the screen. In the brief second before saving, my reflection appeared, tired, blurred, nearly transparent in the background. For the first time, I saw myself not as a person, but as a ghost. And that night, I cried again in the bathroom. Not loudly, not violently, but in a way that made the tiles seem to absorb the sound, as if even the walls were tired of hearing me. The faucet ran, my chest rose and fell, and still, I wondered how I had come to this, a shadow in my own story. But silence has a strange way of transforming. It eats at you until it finds a voice of its own. And deep inside me, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the humiliation, something stirred. A crack, a fracture, not of weakness this time, but of anger. For the first time in months, I whispered to myself, this cannot continue. And though no one heard me, the silence broke a little. The night before it ended, I couldn't sleep. The glow of Chica's phone filled the room, as it always did, but I no longer felt the urge to hide my tears. I lay on my side, staring at the unopened parcel by the door, the one I had never touched. It had become more than a box. It was a monument to everything I had buried inside myself. The next day, she dragged me along to another event. Another pop-up, another stage, another crowd that screamed her name and looped past me as though I were transparent. I carried the tripod, the bags, the weight of my silence. But this time, something inside me had shifted. As she laughed for the cameras, I stepped back. Farther and farther, until the cheers became muffled and distant. I stood at the edge of the crowd, clutching the tripod, watching her glow. It was dazzling, blinding, but it was no longer mine to protect. She did not notice when I walked away. The streets of Lagos swallowed me, Danfo buses honking, hawkers shouting, life moving at its own rhythm. For the first time in months, the noise felt like oxygen instead of suffocation. I walked without destination, my hands finally free. That night, I packed my things. Not much, just a small bag with the clothes I owned and the phone that had once been my prison. The unopened parcel stayed behind. It had never been meant for me. When she came home, she barely looked up. She was already live, already laughing, already glowing for the world. I wondered if she even noticed the silence in the room, the real silence, the kind that comes when a presence is gone. I left the key on the table. And as I closed the door behind me, I whispered again, but louder this time, this cannot continue. The night air was cool against my face. I did not have answers, I did not have applause, I did not have an audience. But I had myself. My footsteps echoed in the dark streets, steady and certain. For the first time, I was no longer a shadow. I was real again. Days passed before she realized I was gone. At first, she thought it was another sulk, another episode of me dragging my feet, but eventually returning with the bags and the smiles. But the tripod was missing. The bed was half empty. The key was gone. And the parcel still sat by the door. She laughed it off for her audience. You know how some people just can't handle the spotlight, she said into her phone, tossing her hair back with practiced ease. But when the live stream ended, the room was too quiet. There was no shuffling on the other side of the bed, no whispered breathing, no silent shadow carrying her world. Her reflection in the phone screen looked different that night, harsher, lonelier. Meanwhile, I had moved into a small room far from the noise of her glow. It wasn't much, a mattress on the floor, one window that stuck when I tried to open it, a kettle that hissed more than it boiled. But it was mine. My space, my silence. For the first time, silence didn't feel like suffocation. It felt like healing. I started walking the streets not as her shadow but as myself. I bought fruit from vendors without hiding behind her. I smiled at strangers without worrying how I looked beside her. Each step was unsteady but real. She tried to call. At first with laughter, then with annoyance, then finally with desperation. We've been through too much, her voice cracked in one message, you can't just leave me like this. But I didn't answer. Her world began to shrink. The camera still loved her, but her eyes were tired. Her content, once glowing with ease, started to look forced. Audiences noticed. Followers slipped away. And then one evening, she came to find me. No cameras, no makeup, no crowd. Just her, standing at the doorway of my small room, eyes swollen, hair tied back without care. She looked at me like she had never seen me before. For the first time, she was the one invisible. I let her speak, but her words fell into the space between us like stones sinking in water. Apologies, excuses, please. None of them could rebuild what had already been broken. Because the truth was simple, she had won for so long, but in the end, it was me who found peace. And peace was louder than her applause.